When HOA President Margaret demanded I unlock my beachfront cabin for her entitled New York relatives at 6 a.m., she had no idea I'd refuse to back down. Her fake, guest accommodation policy was about to expose years of financial fraud and destroy her corrupt empire forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I was barely awake when my phone started buzzing with an unknown number. This is Margaret Hartwell, HOA President of Sunset Beach Community. You need to unlock your cabin immediately for my guests. I sat up in bed, confused. Excuse me? Who is this? I said, I'm the HOA President. My family from New York is visiting and they need a place to stay. Your beachfront cabin has been empty all month. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ma'am, that's my private property. I don't rent it out. All beachfront properties in this community are available for HOA member use when vacant. It's in the bylaws you signed. I'd owned this cabin for 3 years and had never heard of such a rule. I never agreed to any such thing. Margaret's voice turned sharp. Young man, I've been running this HOA for 15 years. I know what I'm talking about. You have 1 hour to get down here with the keys. She hung up before I could respond. My cabin was 2 hours away from my main house in the city. I'd bought it as a peaceful retreat where I could write and relax away from work stress. The idea of strangers using it made my stomach turn. I called my neighbor Tom, who lived year-round at the beach. Tom, do you know anything about HOA rules for vacant properties? What rules? Margaret makes up new ones every week. Last month she tried to charge people for using the beach access. The month before that she claimed all outdoor furniture had to match her approved color scheme. This sounded like another one of Margaret's power trips. I decided to drive down and see what was happening. When I arrived at my cabin, there was a family of 6 standing on my deck with suitcases. Margaret was pacing around my property with a ring of keys, trying each one in my front door. None of these work, she screamed at a maintenance worker. Break the lock if you have to. I parked and walked over. What exactly do you think you're doing? Margaret spun around, her face red with anger. There you are. Where are the keys? My brother-in-law flew here from Manhattan. He's not sleeping in a hotel. He's not sleeping in my cabin either. The maintenance worker looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I can't break into someone's private property. That's illegal. It's not private when it's vacant. Margaret shrieked. HOA policy clearly states that empty beachfront properties can be used by members for family visits. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Show me this policy in writing. Margaret's brother-in-law, a large man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. Listen, buddy, we've been traveling all day. Just give us the keys and we'll be out of your hair by Sunday. No. This is my property. The man's wife joined in. How selfish can you be? It's just sitting here empty while we have nowhere to stay. Their teenage kids were already trying to peek through my windows. One was taking pictures of the inside with his phone. Get away from my cabin, I said firmly. All of you. Margaret pulled out an official-looking document. This is a binding HOA agreement that gives us access to vacant properties for community use. I read the paper quickly. It was full of legal-sounding language, but I noticed it wasn't signed by me or notarized properly. This is fake, I said. I never signed this. You signed it when you bought the property. Margaret insisted. No, I didn't. And even if I had, you can't just take someone's house for your relatives. The brother-in-law was getting aggressive. We paid good money to come here. You're ruining our vacation. That's not my problem. Margaret started dialing her phone. Fine. I'm calling the police. You're violating HOA regulations and disturbing the peace. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. Margaret immediately started complaining. This man is refusing to provide accommodation for visiting HOA members. It's a violation of our community standards. Officer Davis looked confused. Ma'am, can you explain what law he's breaking? HOA law. He signed an agreement. I handed Officer Davis my property deed and the fake document Margaret had shown me. He examined both carefully. Sir, this is definitely your property. And this HOA document doesn't look legally binding. Ma'am, you can't force someone to let you use their house. Margaret's face turned purple. I've been running this HOA for 15 years. I know what's legal. Being an HOA president doesn't give you the right to take someone's property, Officer Davis explained patiently. The brother-in-law started yelling. This is ridiculous. We reserved this place. You reserved it without my permission, I said. Officer Davis asked to see the official HOA bylaws. Margaret claimed they were back at her office, but she could recite them from memory. Ma'am, that's not how the law works. If you can't produce proper documentation, these people need to leave this property immediately. Margaret tried a different approach. What about community spirit? What about helping fellow HOA members? What about respecting property rights? I shot back. The teenage kids were now complaining loudly about having to find a hotel. Their parents were making calls trying to book last-minute accommodations. This is going to cost us a fortune, the wife complained. Hotels are so expensive here. Maybe you should have made reservations instead of assuming you could steal someone's house, I replied. Margaret wasn't giving up. This isn't over. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. We'll vote on your membership status. Go ahead. I'll bring my lawyer. After the police left with Margaret's family, I called Tom again. She tried to break into your cabin? Tom laughed. That woman has lost her mind. Has she done this before? She's tried to claim authority over everything. Last year she said she could use anyone's pool when they weren't home. The year before that, she tried to park her RV in people's driveways without asking. I decided to do some research on Margaret's HOA activities. What I found was shocking. She'd been collecting special assessment fees for community improvements. That never happened. She'd given herself a salary as HOA president even though the position was supposed to be volunteer. She'd been using HOA funds to pay for her own property maintenance. Most interesting of all, she'd been telling new property owners that they had to sign additional agreements giving her expanded powers. These agreements weren't legally valid, but most people signed them without reading carefully. Margaret had been running a small empire built on intimidation and fake authority. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday. Margaret had sent notices to all property owners claiming I was disrupting community harmony and violating guest accommodation policies. About 40 people showed up at the community center. Margaret had prepared a PowerPoint presentation about my violations. This selfish individual refused to share his vacant property with visiting family members, she announced dramatically. This goes against everything our community stands for. Several neighbors spoke up in my defense. Since when do we have to let strangers use our houses? Asked Mrs. Chin. I've never heard of this guest policy, added Bob Martinez. Margaret claimed the policy had been in effect for years, but no one could remember agreeing to it. I stood up and presented my research on Margaret's financial activities. The room went silent as I read through the misappropriated funds and fake agreements. Margaret has been collecting money for projects that don't exist and claiming authority she doesn't have, I explained. The guest policy is just another example of her making up rules to benefit herself. Margaret tried to deny everything, but I had bank records and signed documents proving the misused funds. Where did the $30,000 for beach cleanup go? I asked. The beach was never cleaned. That money it's being held for future projects, Margaret stammered. In your personal checking account? The crowd started getting angry. People demanded to see HOA financial records. Margaret claimed they were confidential. By the end of the meeting, Margaret had been voted out as HOA president by a margin of 38-2. The only votes in her favor came from her own family members. Tom was elected as the new president with a mandate to investigate Margaret's financial management. 3 weeks later, Margaret received a certified letter demanding repayment of all misappropriated HOA funds. The total came to over $85,000. She tried to claim the money had been spent on legitimate expenses, but couldn't provide receipts for anything. Margaret's lawyer advised her to settle rather than face criminal charges for embezzlement. She agreed to pay back the money in monthly installments and resigned from all HOA activities. The fake guest accommodation policy was officially revoked, along with a dozen other made-up rules Margaret had imposed over the years. As for her brother-in-law's family, they had to pay premium rates for a last-minute hotel booking. They spent their vacation complaining about the expense and vowing never to visit again. Margaret moved away 6 months later, unable to afford her mortgage payments after the settlement. Her house sold for well below market value. The new HOA leadership implemented transparent financial reporting and required all policy changes to be voted on by the membership. My beachfront cabin remained my private retreat just as it should be. I installed security cameras after the incident, just in case Margaret or anyone else got ideas about uninvited visits. Tom occasionally jokes that we should rename our community Sunset Beach, no trespassing allowed. The idea always gets a good laugh at HOA meetings. But Margaret wasn't finished trying to get revenge. Even after losing her position and being forced to pay restitution, she continued causing problems for months. 2 weeks after the settlement, I arrived at my cabin to find my deck furniture rearranged and my outdoor shower turned on. Someone had been on my property. I checked my new security cameras and saw Margaret sneaking around at 3 a.m., trying to find ways to vandalize my property without being caught on camera. I called the police and showed them the footage. Margaret was arrested for criminal trespassing and given a restraining order to stay away from my property. Her lawyer warned her that any further contact with me or my property would result in serious jail time. Margaret's financial problems got worse when the IRS started investigating her tax returns. Apparently, she'd never reported the HOA money she'd stolen as income. The tax investigation revealed even more fraud. Margaret had been claiming fake business deductions and hiding income from her part-time real estate work. She ended up owing the government over $40,000 in back taxes and penalties on top of the HOA restitution. Margaret's husband, Robert, filed for divorce 6 months after the HOA scandal broke. He claimed he'd had no idea about her financial crimes and didn't want to be responsible for her debts. In the divorce proceedings, it came out that Margaret had been forging Robert's signature on various documents for years. She'd taken out credit cards in his name and made investments without his knowledge. Robert got to keep their retirement savings while Margaret was stuck with all the debt from her schemes. The stress of the legal problems and financial ruin took a toll on Margaret's health. Neighbors reported seeing her having screaming matches with process servers and debt collectors. She started drinking heavily and was arrested twice for drunk driving. Her real estate license was revoked, cutting off her last source of legitimate income. Meanwhile, our community was thriving under the new HOA leadership. Tom implemented monthly financial reports so everyone could see exactly how their money was being spent. The beach cleanup that Margaret had collected money for finally happened. Volunteers removed tons of debris and planted native vegetation to prevent erosion. A real community improvement fund was established with strict oversight and transparent spending. Projects had to be approved by majority vote before any money could be spent. Property values in our area started rising as word spread about our honest, well-managed HOA. People wanted to move to a community where residents had real input on decisions. Tom organized monthly social events where neighbors could get to know each other and discuss community issues. It was a stark contrast to Margaret's secretive, authoritarian style. The guest accommodation scandal had one unexpected benefit. It brought neighbors together who had never spoken before. People started looking out for each other's properties and reporting suspicious activity. Mrs. Chun started a neighborhood watch program after Margaret's trespassing incident. Residents took turns patrolling the area and checking on vacant properties. Bob Martinez organized a community garden where families could grow vegetables together. It became a popular gathering place where children could play while adults socialized. 6 months after Margaret's departure, I got a call from a reporter writing a story about HOA corruption. Margaret's case had become an example of how unchecked power can lead to abuse. "What would you tell other homeowners dealing with similar situations?" the reporter asked. "Don't be afraid to ask questions and demand accountability," I said. Most HOA corruption happens because people assume someone else is watching the finances. The article was published in a national magazine and led to Margaret being contacted by other communities where she'd lived previously. It turned out Margaret had run similar scams in 3 different states over the past 20 years. She would move to a new area, get elected to the HOA board, and gradually expand her authority while skimming money. A class action lawsuit was filed against Margaret by victims from multiple communities. The total amount of her theft was estimated at over $300,000. Margaret tried to declare bankruptcy to avoid paying, but the court ruled that debts from criminal activity couldn't be discharged. She would be making payments for the rest of her life. Her brother-in-law from New York, who had started the whole cabin incident, publicly disowned her. He gave an interview saying he was embarrassed to be related to someone who would steal from her neighbors. "We had no idea she was a criminal when we visited," he told reporters. "If we'd known, we never would have gone along with her scheme to use someone else's property." Margaret's children, who lived in other states, changed their last names to distance themselves from their mother's crimes. They released a statement apologizing to all her victims. A year after the incident, Margaret was working as a cashier at a discount store, living in a tiny apartment and taking the bus to work. Her BMW had been repossessed months earlier. Former neighbors would occasionally see her around town and report that she looked much older and more tired. The stress of her legal troubles had taken a visible toll. Tom received updates on Margaret's restitution payments through the court system. She was paying the minimum amount required, which meant it would take her decades to pay back everything she'd stolen. Meanwhile, my cabin had become more valuable than ever. The improved HOA management and community reputation attracted high-end buyers who appreciated the area's integrity. I started renting the cabin to carefully screen guests during weeks when I wasn't using it. The rental income helped pay for property improvements and gave me extra money for travel. The irony wasn't lost on me that Margaret's attempt to steal my property for her family had ultimately led to me making money from legitimate rentals. Tom jokes that Margaret accidentally did us all a favor by being so obviously corrupt that it forced the community to implement proper oversight systems. The new HOA bylaws specifically prohibit any single person from having unilateral authority over community funds or policies. All major decisions require majority votes and independent financial audits. Property owners now receive detailed quarterly reports showing exactly how their HOA fees are spent. Every expense over $500 must be approved by the board and documented with receipts. The community has become a model for other HOAs struggling with corruption or mismanagement. Tom regularly gets calls from other neighborhoods asking for advice on implementing transparent governance. 3 years later, Margaret made one final attempt to cause trouble. She filed a lawsuit claiming the HOA had violated her due process rights by removing her without proper notice. Her lawyer argued that the financial investigation was conducted illegally and that she deserved compensation for the damage to her reputation. The judge dismissed the case within an hour of hearing arguments. Margaret was ordered to pay court costs and warned that filing frivolous lawsuits could result in additional penalties. That was the last anyone heard from Margaret legally. She apparently finally accepted that her schemes had been exposed and her victims weren't going to let her escape consequences. My cabin continues to be my peaceful retreat from city life. I've added a hot tub and expanded the deck where Margaret's family once stood with their suitcases demanding entry. The security cameras I installed after Margaret's trespassing have never caught another intruder. The Neighborhood Watch program and improved community relationships have made crime virtually non-existent. Sometimes I sit on my deck in the evening, watching the sunset over the water, and think about how different things might have been if I'd given in to Margaret's demands that first day. If I'd handed over my keys to avoid confrontation, Margaret might still be stealing from the community today. Her brother-in-law's family would have had their free vacation while Margaret continued expanding her fake authority. Instead, one moment of refusing to back down led to exposing years of corruption and fraud. An entire community was freed from an abusive leader who had been stealing their money and making up rules to suit her personal agenda. The whole experience taught me that bullies often appear more powerful than they actually are. Margaret had built her authority on intimidation and the assumption that people wouldn't challenge her. When someone finally called her bluff and demanded proof of her claims, her entire house of cards collapsed within weeks. Other property owners have thanked me for standing up to Margaret when they were too afraid to speak up themselves. Many had suspected something was wrong but didn't know how to challenge an established HOA president. The lesson for anyone dealing with similar situations is simple. Ask questions, demand documentation, and don't be intimidated by people claiming authority they don't actually have. Margaret thought she could use my property as her personal hotel for family visits. Instead, she ended up losing her home, her position, her reputation, and her freedom. Sometimes the person who seems most powerful is actually the most vulnerable when their lies are finally exposed. My beachfront cabin remains exactly what it was always meant to be. My private sanctuary where invited guests are welcome and entitled strangers are kept out. The sound of waves crashing on the shore is much more peaceful when you know your property rights are secure and your community is run by honest people. Margaret's legacy is serving as a cautionary tale about what happens when unchecked power meets determined resistance. Justice may be slow sometimes, but it's always worth fighting for.